Oh, Mexico. It sounds so simple, I just gotta go. Now, when you go, medical cannabis is legal. Finally. Trouble in the plains of South Dakota as their governor tries to stop the voters' wishes for adult use. And we hear from Captain Hooter on the thinning of the cafe industry in his beloved Amsterdam on We Talk News next. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Weed Talk News. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media.
And I'm your main man, Rye Russell from Weed Buds Radio.
Every week, Rye and I get together and share news items and opinions from the emerging cannabis industry. And Rye, you've got the lead story this week. Do you understand any Spanish?
Well, I know that Mexico welcomes a legal medical program, but as far as my Spanish goes, Jimmy, yo no hablo mucho español.
That means you don't understand too much Spanish?
6 years of Spanish, Jimmy. My advisor was very disappointed in me.
Well, it almost took 6 years for the country to come around, and it did take a very long time. In fact, more than 3 years just to get to this point. Amendments were made years ago to the General Health Law and Federal Criminal Code, and then it took another 180 days from there to implement changes. Guess what? They even missed that deadline. Next deadline, that was set up by their own Supreme Court on September 9th, and they needed another 70 days to get it done. But now it's official. The Mexican government will control and supervise the production of raw materials, molecular and pharmacological derivatives for scientific and industrial medical cannabis purposes. This opens the borders for exports of Mexican cannabis to European, South American, and yes, USA markets. Big time blow to the illegal market in Mexico, right?
It absolutely can be, Jimmy. And speaking of these numbers, let's start off our week with a report from the ArcView Group and BDS Analytics, where they expect that the global cannabis market could reach up to and surpass $42 billion by the year 2024. As we know, the coronavirus has not slowed down this industry. Rather, companies are getting staffed up and rapidly trying to meet consumer demand. Speaking of which, consumers are begging for more edibles. And as companies decide where to spend their innovation dollars this year, we need to review last year's top-selling products. And it seems to me, Jimmy, that manufacturers should be spending that time developing maybe some more discreet ways to consume cannabis. For more, let's go to Deb Borchardt with the Green Market Report.
Thanks, guys. According to data from Akerna, this Christmas holiday generated $427 million in cannabis sales. Now, typically the Friday before Christmas is the biggest sales day of the holidays, but this year Christmas was on a Friday. So it was the Wednesday before Christmas that got the most significant bump, with sales jumping 76%. This week, Cresco Labs said it was buying Florida-based Bluma Wellness in an all-stock deal valued at $213 million. Bluma operates the One Plant Florida chain and has 7 strategically located dispensaries with 8 more locations planned to open. Earnings are starting to roll in. Aphria reported that its second quarter net revenue increased 33% to $160.5 million. Still, the company delivered a net loss of $120 million. GrowGeneration released preliminary full year 2020 revenue of $192 million. That was an increase of 140%. The company also said its fourth quarter revenue rose 142% to $61.5 million. Now that's versus just $25 million for the fourth quarter of 2019. And that's it for this week. I'm Deborah Borchardt from the Green Market Report for Weed Talk News.
Now let's talk about what's going on in South Dakota. If you've been following that state's cannabis reform initiative, you know that voters passed adult use and a medical program at the ballot box in November. Now their governor, Kristi Noem, is backing litigation that aims to overthrow the approval of the change to the state constitution about adult use of cannabis. She is not challenging the medical question that also passed at the ballot box. The medical question passed at 70% margin, the adult use at 54% margin. Needless to say, the state's normal coordinator, Carly Wolf, is pretty upset. She said, quote, "These are cynical attempts to undermine the democratic process, asking judges to set aside the votes of over 1 million South Dakotans in a desperate attempt to override undisputed election outcomes." Unquote. Yeah, I wonder where I've heard that before. Never in my life has the democratic process been questioned as much as we've seen over the past few months. And yes, cannabis is right in the middle of it. Right? South Dakota is not on either coast, but there is a debate on which coast will dominate the cannabis market, east or west.
Well, in a new piece by our friend Rosie Matteo for the Rolling Stone, she writes about how 2020 was an incredible year for the cannabis industry and that we can expect the industry to start to mature much more rapidly now that federal legalization is expected. She talks about the importance of understanding the differences between what consumers expect in terms of branding and a feeling of connection from coast versus one coast. And brands need to penetrate this domino effect of legalization here on the East Coast. They may need to do a little bit more research to match the consumer that we have here that are demanding a little bit more transparency and maybe some more modern ways of communication. So Rosie makes some amazing points here when discussing the changing of consumer demographics and the need for businesses to stay clever. But it is interesting to watch as West Coast brands move east and as East Coast companies start to adopt more culture in terms of the cannabis industry.
So once again, Rye, the question remains, when will the federal government act on cannabis reform with a new administration set to take over next week? Michael Correa is the Director of Government Relations for the NCIA in Washington, D.C. We talked with him about this last week on the Green Rush Show, that of course we live stream on Fridays on our social media outlets from 4 to 6. He explains that with this new Congress under Democrat control, there is an opportunity for a number of reforms to be instituted before the home run of full legalization.
It could be something like research or hemp or decriminalization as you work your way up to medical marijuana to full adult use. So on that scale, there's like low-hanging fruit and then the end goal of complete federal legalization, being the end goal. And what can we do to get up to that point? And so, yes, there's the easy stuff, which is let's just stop arresting people for this. Stop arresting people in this war on drugs so no one's lives are ruined because they're consuming a plant that's natural that 30 plus states have said, hey, we're okay with this. There shouldn't be these differences. So just stopping arresting these people and then worrying about what's the next step? What do we do next? What do we do to achieve some of these goals?
So one call from the executive branch to the Department of Justice could change the scheduling class of cannabis. And that would be a huge first step for this administration, right, Rye?
It would. But Jimmy, I'm ready for our main cannabis report.
I'm ready too.
All right. Well, your main man here, Rye Russell, and some interesting news. ProVerde Laboratories was shut down due to operating without proper city permits or licensing. Cited in December, founder and chief scientist Christopher Hudala stated that he was unaware that the city of Portland requirements were different from the state. The lab will stay open and it has not laid off any employees, but will be unable to test THC-rich cannabis until further review. Interesting.
Interesting that I didn't realize that the Maine medical cannabis program didn't already test for THC, CBD, contaminants, and pesticides. I'm kind of shocked. I mean, isn't that the whole point of legalization, so that you know when you go to a medical dispensary, you know it's been tested? But I think this has been grandfathered from the caretaker program.
I think it does stem from the caregivers, Jimmy, and that is a great point that the chief scientist Hudala made, stating that this is a necessary part of the equation. We want our cannabis tested. And luckily, hopefully, Representative Patricia Hymanson introduced a bill that will hopefully pass that should clarify some of this, and it will bring a little bit more consistency between the adult use and the medical cannabis market here in Maine. And now let's head to Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast with our DC report. Phil?
Hi, Phil Adams here from Vote Pro Podcast, and this is the We Talk News DC report. The U.S. Census Bureau has announced it's planning to begin collecting marijuana tax revenue data from states where cannabis is legal. The Bureau currently collects state tax data as part of their quarterly economic reports published in the Federal Register. These reports measure economic activity across the country and highlight the extent to which different streams of revenue fill state and local coffers. The new plan will add tax data from cannabis sales and sports betting, which the Bureau said will, quote, modernize the survey's content to maintain the relevancy and sustainability of these data. The U.S. Department of Agriculture has announced it will begin making more grant money available to support the breeding, testing, and development of, quote, superior performing hemp varieties. Under the agency's Supplemental and Alternative Crops Grant Program, the USDA began funding improved efficacy in hemp cultivation in 2019 following passage of the 2018 Farm Bill. In this recent announcement, the USDA outlined plans to increase funding for this year's program from $50,000 to $125,000 per year for up to 4 years. Virginia Governor Ralph Northam has unveiled legislation to legalize adult use of cannabis in the Commonwealth. This comes less than 8 months after Northam signed a bill that decriminalized cannabis possession in Virginia. It also follows a similar bill introduced last week by State Delegate Steve Heretic to the Virginia General Assembly. The Northam bill would allow adults 21 and older to purchase and possess up to 1 ounce of cannabis and to cultivate up to 4 cannabis plants, including 2 mature plants, for personal use. The proposal would also impose a new 21% tax on cannabis sales on top of the state's existing 6% sales tax. Possession of quantities between 1 ounce and 5 pounds of cannabis would incur a civil penalty punishable by a $25 fine. That's the Weed Talk News DC report for this week. I'm Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast.
In the state of New Hampshire, their Supreme Court said that consuming hallucinogenic mushrooms as part of a religious ceremony does not automatically disturb the public peace. And even though eating them is illegal, and therefore the act might be protected by the New Hampshire Constitution, the unanimous ruling on this means that it has to go back to the original court that ruled on this. And so we will see what they conclude, but the Supreme Court said it doesn't necessarily pass the balancing test between religious liberty and government interest. And so they're going to kick it back down, and we'll see what the outcome is.
Live free or die, baby. That's New Hampshire, right? That is New Hampshire. All right. It was 1 week ago that New Jersey legislators were poised to announce their new adult use cannabis laws when that deal fell apart over underage provisions. Governor Phil Murphy did say in his State of the State address this week that we are on the verge of passing a groundbreaking set of laws to reform our historically unjust approach to marijuana and cannabis. Our cannabis industry will promote the growth of new small businesses, many of which will be owned by women, minorities, and veterans. Well, now it's time to head north of the border to Canada for the Canadian Cannabis Report with Solomon Israel from MJ Biz Daily's International Bureau. Solomon?
I'm Solomon Israel from Marijuana Business Daily International, and this is the Weed Talk News Canadian Cannabis Report. Canadian grower Organigram reported falling revenue for its first quarter. The company earned a net revenue of 19.3 million Canadian dollars, down about 5% from the previous quarter. CEO Greg Engel cited inconsistent inventory that led to missed sales opportunities, as well as falling international sales. Aphria also reported quarterly earnings this week. The company grew its net revenue by 10% over the previous quarter to 160.5 million Canadian dollars. Aphria is due to merge with competitor Tilray this year. And Aphria CEO Irwin Simon was the top paid cannabis CEO in Canada in 2019, according to a new analysis. His total compensation for the year was 18.4 million Canadian dollars. Another of other cannabis industry executives also made the list of Canada's 100 best paid CEOs for 2019. You can read all those stories and more at mjbizdaily.com. I'm Solomon Israel for Marijuana Business Daily.
From Au Canada to Au Francois, the country of France is running an online questionnaire over the next month to better understand their public's opinion about cannabis. Right now, it is illegal to consume, possess, and sell cannabis for adult use recreationally in France. However, 1/4 of all adults consume weed in France, and 5 million use it at least once a month. So, Ryan, when I ask you what European country is the most friendly towards cannabis, what would you guess?
I would say it has to be the Netherlands, in that capital city of Amsterdam.
And you are correct for $0. Right now, anyway, in fact, for decades, the coffee houses in Amsterdam have been openly selling weed, and over 49 million tourists flock to that country every year to partake in that casual culture and approach to cannabis. Now, the mayor of Amsterdam, Felke Helmsema, wants to close many of those coffee houses in order to have better control over its use. Now, when it comes to an opinion about the coffee houses in Amsterdam, I go straight to Captain Hooter, who literally wrote the definitive guide to those coffee houses a few years ago.
Literally, all of the dominoes are ready to fall over into the positive cannabis industry around the world. You are surrounded by countries that are either legal already or are legalizing soon. You just had Great Britain leave with the Brexit thing. Everybody's economy is in the toilet. So they're going to be forced to have to legalize or at least decriminalize in all of these countries. And this country decides that no, we're going to take our 40 years of amazing branding and wonderful experience that we've had bringing all these loyal people here, and we're just going to push them all away. It's one of the silliest things I've ever heard.
Captain Hooter should know. He's visited and reviewed all 166 coffee houses and cafes when he lived in Amsterdam. His book is still the most comprehensive guide in the industry. He warns that the contraction of open cafes might be the first step for that government to take over the cannabis trade in the Netherlands.
As far as cutting down, I think they're stabbing the industry, the people that have been there and have suffered for years, decades. Remember one other thing that's kind of interesting about Amsterdam that a lot of people don't realize. It's not legal there. It's tolerated.
Right.
Tolerated. Remember, when I was living there, here I am, I'm 59 years old. I had to roll up a towel and stick it under my door. So when I smoked a joint, the smell didn't go out and my neighbor didn't smell it and call the police on me. Okay. So they still live in a very kind of I wouldn't say a police state, but I mean in this really regulated environment where the growers are still criminals until they bring the weed through the door. And then when it's through the door, then they're heroes. And, oh, this is this great grower. He grows this great bud. But when he's outside coming in there, he's a criminal. So the whole system has been messed up for a while. And it's been, talk about clamped down and held back. It's held back dramatically.
Well, you know, it's just never easy in the cannabis world, is it, Rye?
No, but here's something to look forward to. If you happen to be a resident of Washington, D.C., the group DC Marijuana Justice, or DCMJ, has a great gift idea when COVID vaccinations finally arrive for the public. They have said that they will call for joints for jabs. DC home growers will lawfully distribute free bags of cannabis outside of vaccination centers as soon as that vaccine arrives.
You know, Rye, you just can't make this stuff up. And that'll do it for another edition of Weed Talk News. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media.
And I'm Rye Russell, your main man from Weed Buds Radio.
Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We Talk Now, We Talk News, and In the Weeds are all available on most major podcast distributors like iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, and our friends at clnsmedia.com and our flagship, cannabis.net. So subscribe, share, and like our videos on all the social media networks out there, including LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, the WeedTube, and YouTube. Weed Talk and In the Weeds are two productions of Pro Cannabis Media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge, and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.